We are live.
All right. Welcome, everybody, to the Creswell Planning Commission meeting. Today is December 17th, 2020, and it is 5:06 p.m. Present, we have Jessica Lanstra, Chair, David Christopher, Ed Gunderson, Seth Clark, Patrick Gehring, and Tammy Sue Shuck. Absent tonight is Susan Bennett. And I would like to welcome Juan here. Thank you for joining us. And then, do we have anyone watching us on YouTube tonight so far, Maddie?
So far, I don't see anyone. Nobody's watching it with us, but if that changes, Chair, I will.
I can't hear you. I think you're muted.
Of course. I don't see anyone at the moment, Chair, but if folks do pop on or I see kind of an interest jump up, then I will certainly let you know.
Perfect. Thank you. All right. Did everyone have a chance to review the minutes of November 19th of 2020? Yes. Do we have a move to approve?
I move. David seconds.
All right. All those in favor, Seth Clark. And Patrick, it looks like David.
Yes.
Okay, and Tammy?
Yes.
And Ed? Okay, looks like we have a unanimous approval of the minutes. All right. And then let's see if we have any audience members. I don't think we do yet. Now, commissioner comments. Does anybody have anything tonight? No comments? Everyone's busy.
Well, the only thing I'd comment, I think probably people are aware that the state just passed some rule about reducing parking. We've been talking about that.
Tell us about it, Ed.
Well, I don't know the full details, but you know, there were things that the state had mandated for minimum parking, and it's been thrown out, changed.
Interesting.
Yeah, it is interesting. I thought maybe you would.
I will certainly get back to you on that, Commissioner. It's ironic because we just recently passed, or Monday, Council passed the downtown plan, which added some parking nuance to some parking standards. So we're kind of in that same shuffle.
Yeah.
But I will do some. You're absolutely right. We should be staying up on legislative actions, and I'm a little bit behind. So I will get back to you all with some more information on what that law entails and some of the changes that might be coming forward later.
Yeah, I'm not real clear on it. With the article in the paper in the card.
All right. Anybody else have any comments? Nothing? All right. We will go ahead and move on to new business, which we will welcome. Juan, I am not going to try your last name. I will let you go with that. But welcome, a planning specialist. Go ahead and introduce yourself.
Thank you, Chair. Commissioners, my name is Juan Farron. I go by John. I'm a 20-year retired Army veteran. Just moved here from Texas to take care of my family who is sick, and now working for the city of Creswell with Maddie as a city planning specialist. And I look forward to working with each and every one of you and get to know you guys more as my time here in Creswell goes on.
John is, if I might add, John is he has a lot of really great communication talents, and he was able to talk us into hiring him during his interview. And he also has, though he hasn't told you yet, but he has about 20 years, those those military years were spent doing horizontal construction. So he knows a lot about building roads. And John, you'll be able to share with us as your tenure increases, like you said, more about your background and your talents. But he's new to the planning field, and he's learning the ropes really fast. And I'm very impressed so far with his ability to take the initiative. So I'll look forward to, bringing him into the fold here in Creswell and showing him the ropes. He did actually the minutes that you just approved were his first set of meeting minutes that he's ever done, and they looked pretty darn good to me. So we'll look forward to being a pretty good team together.
Welcome.
Thank you, sir.
Awesome. Well, let's go ahead and move on to our RV park standards. We are going to review what we have and amend as needed. Maddie?
Chair, thank you for the introduction, and commissioners, thank you for your review of some of the draft standards I've put together with John's help to look at the topic of RV park standards in Creswell. As you know, and per our conversation last month, or 2 months ago now, it would have been in October, per our conversation a couple months ago, you'll remember that you voiced some substantial support for the standards that the city of Stayton has on their books, and we started from that direction. And what you see before you is a draft of some of the same criteria with a couple changes. Some of those changes were related to where the code fits into our existing regulations. So you'll see some of those sections called out. Section 2.3110 in allowed land uses. You'll see that RV parks are identified as an allowed use as a conditional use with standards, which, as you'll see with other commercial categories in commercial land, also have similar conditional use requirements. The difference between an outright allowed use, a permitted use, and a conditional use standard brings to bear 2 or 3 additional criteria that are primarily discretionary, meaning they're not always black and white. This is something that's important because you all expressed, and I heard in your conversation, some concern about certain lots not being just quite appropriate for this type of use, that there are certain areas that, given the dynamic nature and perhaps the latitude that an RV park might wish to install, you would like to be able to consider that based on not only some clear and objective standards, but also some discretionary ones. For example, if a property was not served by an adequate roadway, or wasn't on a large enough roadway to accommodate the traffic for this type of use, you might want the ability to not only increase the requirements for that type of impact, but you may also wish to say something at a much higher level, that is, this development may not fit in this location. And have the ability to stand behind a conditional use process that's a little bit more nuanced, rather than have to fight the outright allowed use of an RV park on any commercial lot in the city. Are there any questions about that before I move into the specific standards? Seeing none, I will move in. 2.3190 is a section at the end of our commercial development code section related to commercial uses, where we often include standards. For example, it's the section that includes quick vehicle servicing and repair, drive up, drive in, drive through uses. Basically says that in addition to the commercial category requirements for a commercial lot with a commercial use on it, there are also some standards specific to that type. So, for example, a drive-through use has a few more standards related to aisles and queuing. making sure that people aren't stacking cars up and spilling into the roadway. In this case, we're going to provide a number of additional criteria for RV parks to meet that are very specific to that kind of use and not applicable to just general commercial development. So you'll see that in that section of the development code. I'll kind of go through the sections and provide you with a summary of where some of that information came from and why it's important. I might ask you to look specifically at some numbers to get a sense of whether you think these numbers are reasonable. These, of course, I'd like to take these once you feel comfortable with this set of criteria. I'd like to take these and kind of shop them with our staff, namely Public Works and our city manager, and just see what their thoughts are on the level of detail as well as the dimensional standards that are typical for our existing development requirements, just to be sure that we're being relatively consistent with those dimensional standards and also that we're not creating some kind of hindrance for a developer to complain about. Starting primarily with, we can talk a little bit about the park design. So the beginning, the location of the RV park, there are minimum lot sizes typical for RV parks because I think the sense is anything less than 2 acres provides kind of a funny relationship or doesn't provide enough land to create the buffering areas between an RV park and other commercial or residential uses. In Staten, I believe their minimum lot standard is 3 acres. Some cities have larger. In this case, I don't know if we have any land that is over 2 acres that's vacant, with the exception of the one area on Melton Road. That said, 2 acres seems like a good place to start as a minimum. Traffic impacts are something that are considered already as part of any commercial development, but just again, you'll see several areas of this code language that references other sections of our development code, in this case 41900. Park design, we talked a lot at your last meeting on this topic about the size of RVs and how much space they needed to enter and exit the facility. Instead of having a 15-foot vision clearance area at the corner, I've called that a 25-foot clearance. That gives a little bit more requirement for vision on both sides as RVs are pulling in or pulling out of the facility. Setback requirements, there were some very generous setback requirements in the Staten code, and I wasn't sure that was very likely or attainable in our community. So I've listed out 35 feet from a state or federal highway. So just imagine Cloverdale Road or Highway 99. I think 35 feet is a pretty substantial setback. Our maximum setback for a commercial development of a freestanding building is 60 feet. So with a minimum of 35, we're guaranteeing a pretty substantial setback that allows the developer to include some landscaping, maybe like a sign that advertises the RV park, etc. When it's abutting a public right-of-way other than a major arterial, so other than Highway 99, Cloverdale, or Oregon Avenue, we would be talking about something more like 15 feet as a minimum. When it's abutting a property line other than a right-of-way, it's a minimum of 15 with some, I think with some cautionary items that may require them to provide at least a little bit more than that in order to put a vehicle. Basically, 15 feet is anything, 15 feet between RVs, 15 feet between RVs side to side or front to back. So essentially every RV is going to get like its own little 15-foot bubble around it. Whether it's at the end of the row or it's in the middle of the row, it's still going to be at least 15 feet.
I have a question about the setbacks.
Please.
I mean, I just wonder, we have 5 foot, right, from property lines for houses now?
Yes.
Why would we go 15?
Why?
I mean, why 15? If we've decided that it's 5 foot for a house, I just would like to know the reasoning.
Oh,
And I'm a little curious about the 35 feet, because how close can a structure now be to a state or federal highway?
well, in some cases, structures are within 0 feet.
Exactly.
For example, there will be a car wash, hopefully, built on the corner of 99 and Oregon Avenue that will adjoin the sidewalk. And I think that's been our intention. Commissioner, I think the challenge that we face here is that we're dealing with moving parts. To build a building 5 feet away from a fence line is, I guess, in my estimation, a bit different than putting a movable object within 5 feet of that same fence line. And the movement might necessitate some space that I don't know if it's there. I'm sure there are ways to design an RV park where that 15 feet can be reduced. But I guess I'm finding it a challenge logistically in putting a moving object within 5 feet of a property line or less.
Maddie, if you take 5 feet from the fence to a house and then 5 feet from a fence to the other house, you've got 10 feet.
Mm-hmm.
Remember that your RVs, how many of them have got these bump outs that come out another 3 feet, 4 feet? So you need that distance, because if you've got a bump out, there's 4 feet. To keep that at least 10, you're gonna need that.
Yeah, I
If
was
I understand
thinking.
that, with bump out, the bump out can't be within 15 feet of the property line.
But I think we're looking at trailer RV to RV. The bump out is not considered RV. So you put 15 feet between them, and each of them has got a bump out that's 3 feet. You subtract the 6, and now they're 9 foot apart. Which, that's fine.
Yeah, okay, that makes sense then to have the 15 feet.
I was also
the space.
considering in between, if you put, if you didn't do a fence, if you actually did some sort of plants, those are generally going to take up a couple feet as well. We called for some sort of separation as well between spaces. And so if you're doing any sort of shrubs, that's going to take up a little bit of space. And I'd never been in an RV park before, and I recently went to one with my sister, and the mere size of these things that people legitimately will live in now, they have slide outs on both sides.
Right.
And it is just impressive how massive these things are. We were looking at pricing actually while we were there, and it's might as well buy a house, that's what it is and for them. And so I think the 15 feet makes a lot of sense, because you have a really long vehicle that you're trying to move. You have, like I said, if your separation, it happens to be shrubbery or something, that's going to take up some space. So that's part of my thoughts on the reasoning for that much space.
And you might also have amenities like a big table and fire pit, that kind of stuff too.
In this case, they're going to have at least 2 at every site. But we'll jump down to section D in a moment. Commissioner Gunderson, does that get us to an appropriate setback, the 15 feet?
Yeah, I understand now the reasoning. Yep.
Great. And I also would just highlight that between any RV space and a building, I think you'll find that the same thing is true. And I think the 30 feet is primarily a number related to maneuvering. as Chair Moore or Chair Landstra noticed or mentioned in her visit to an RV park recently, that I think the last thing that we'd like to see is an RV park that is somewhat assumed or perceived to be unsafe, because folks are bringing in large vehicles and coming very close to structures.
Even a small RV puller, I have an R-Pod. It's only about 18 feet long, but it does have a bump out that comes out 3 feet. And the more room, the better. I'm not the best tower and backer-upper of a trailer, though I am getting better.
It's a rite of passage, David.
With experience, you get better. We prefer the pull-throughs, of course.
Yeah.
And the places we go that have the landscaping separation between lots, those are much more desirable. So that would probably lend into the design and the profitability of a said facility in Creswell. So anyway.
Any other questions or comments about setbacks before we move into the street design? Nope. Okay. Streets or roadways, per your conversation, commissioners, I included standards that made a little bit of sense or looked a lot like existing streets, like smaller versions of a common streets section that we would have in the city, assuming that smaller units were identified. So these standards might look a lot like what our standards could look like or would look like for a cottage cluster or a development that incorporated several small housing units on it. So that's just something to think about in the back of your mind, that we have sort of parallel or similar standards for those two types of uses. I think the first three items pertain specifically to emergency vehicles, that just the internal streets may not be designed to a public design standard because they are private, they're internal. But in fact, we still want to assure that there is access by ambulances and fire trucks, both of which are very heavy vehicles, so they'll need to prepare the roadway to accommodate those uses. Drainage is always a concern. Speaking of just sort of alluding to our conversation at the beginning of our meeting as it was getting started, that we have very wet season, and we would rather not have our RV guests parked in a puddle. So drainage is important. Now here, where we get to two-way traffic, I've seen standards as narrow as 20 feet for a two-way street. And I've seen one-way streets as small as 15 or 14 feet. These are some guesses, some rough numbers, and I'd appreciate your thoughts on it.
Is that why we have the 18 parentheses 14?
Yeah, exactly. I may have second-guessed myself in the middle of developing these. So your thoughts on how wide an internal street ought to be? We have, just for context, in downtown Creswell, we have several roadways that are about 25 feet paved width, no sidewalks, and none of those are one-ways, but so they accommodate two-way traffic on a small right-of-way, but getting to the point made prior by commissioners that some of these RVs are really big. I would want to know about your thoughts on how wide the street should be.
30 and 18 would be fine.
Yeah.
30 including the sidewalk or 30 excluding the sidewalk?
I've seen like very, very few RV parks with sidewalks.
Okay.
That's a rarity.
Okay.
You kind of walk along like we do here in Cottage Grove. You walk down the middle of the street, and when somebody comes your way, you get the heck out of the way.
Well, one thing we do require, Commissioner Christopher, is that we do actually require some kind of separated footpath or a sidewalk. It doesn't have to be a formal, necessarily an ADA compliant sidewalk, I don't think. But that may come into play because I was just recently speaking with our building official about ADA standards for commercial developments, and he indicated that there are some standards for, especially for facilities that service so many different folks in a day that are open to the public like this. There may be some ADA standards that apply about what kinds of pathways you can provide, but I guess in my hearing of your conversation, I heard you all say that you were inclined to require sidewalks to make it look and feel a little bit like a neighborhood, so that we don't have little kids running in the middle of the street with someone driving like a big, giant RV.
I think my only thoughts on that is if you're doing pull-through parking spots, you are literally going to have, I mean, your sidewalk is going to be, that's going to be a real fun one to do. Like because every
vehicle,
every so many feet, you're going to have to be dipping it down and it's going to get hit constantly. The one that I was at, for example, I was informed that this was a nicer one. I don't know. I've never ever been in one before. But it was all paved, except for the little sections in between where you had your fire pit and your picnic table. And so it was all at the same level. But when you walk through, you didn't have traffic. And if you did, it's pull through, so it's kind of mainly going one way. And it's all moving 5 miles per hour max. They're not going fast. Me and my niece, we went and we were skateboarding through the park, and I don't think we once met a vehicle, and we went through the whole park. I mean, we were gone for an hour. So it's just thoughts. I mean, I don't know that sidewalks would be, I think they would look nice. I don't know that it would be needed or even more attractive, to be honest, in that situation.
I don't know that I've ever been in an RV park with sidewalks. I've not been in a lot, but I've been in some. Never seen a sidewalk.
That's why I quoted that is I've been probably to 50 all the way from Texas to Canada along the West Coast, and I can't really right offhand say I've seen with curbs and sidewalk and so on. I've seen areas that they have put a line on the pavement that kind of say, give you the idea that this is your bicycle and walking lane. And that's about the extent of any kind of sidewalk that I have seen.
Okay, what's the feeling on removing the section related to sidewalks or separated footpaths, and instead perhaps adding some detail to VII below it that's providing a pedestrian access and connectivity to the public right-of-way? So where there are opportunities to create a direct pedestrian connection to the sidewalk, let's say you park your RV and you want to go visit Blue Valley Bistro down the street and you're only a quarter of a mile away, maybe there's an encouragement of direct pedestrian connections, like a bark mulch path or a separated walkway that gives folks an option other than walking in the middle of the road with the vehicles.
Yeah, I think that makes more sense. Direct access to a dog park nearby, direct access to, restaurant, or, direct access in the park to their convenience store that they have inside the park. I think that makes more sense to me, especially if it's moving, you're needing to go through something to get there, that they kind of path that.
Okay. Yeah, and that's typically a bark mulch or some kind of path like that.
I guess that's where it starts to look a little bit more like a campground, in the sense that it has, like these pathways that connect perhaps the sites where you park with some amenities that are elsewhere on the campus. Okay. I'm happy to make that change. So we're going to strike VI, and we're just going to make a more robust following one saying direct connections for pedestrian access. Any feeling on requirements for the surface of that? Can they decide what they'd like?
I was going to chime in and recommend that it be a paved surface.
Okay.
That's my opinion.
I was thinking paved or pavers. Also, I've seen that they've done like really nice paths with pavers that are actually level and like they do a good job, so it's not like all off kilter. So that might be an option too.
Mm-hmm. Sounds good to me. Great. And then I think one of the other critical components, other than the surface of the walkway, is that they're lit. They have lighting. Moving on to the spaces. So all the spaces have to front one of those interior roadways. 20 feet is kind of the minimum size to get your unit in and out of the facility, whether it's a pull through or a back in.
Oh my God, boy, only 20 feet. Whoa.
Minimum.
Sorry.
For the people with the small version of the R-Pod,
Okay.
their width doesn't exceed the width of like an old Toyota truck.
There you go.
They can use the 20-foot spaces. The big kind of Jagunda RV units, they might need bigger spaces, but that's something you can leave to the market. Someone building an RV park is going to have some specific criteria about what kinds of units they want to accommodate. But the minimum being 20, we don't want someone showing up asking to do like little 15-foot spaces. Each space, so that kind of equates to about, I think I went for 800 square feet was the smallest spot that you could probably rent out with a vehicle in a RV unit towing behind. Anything smaller than that, I think you get too cramped. But you might actually see spaces exceed, 1,500 square feet in some cases. But that was just a guess, kind of out there. I used the same standard to visualize it as like an accessory dwelling unit. Is our 800 square feet someone has to have, or that's the biggest that it can be in a backyard. And that usually ends up amounting to, it's like 8 by 10 is about the smallest you can do. In this case, I don't think they're going to be governed by a minimum square footage so much as a minimum frontage to the roadway, like the criterion before. But in case they have like a triangular shaped space or something like this, it can be a little smaller than the typical rectangle. And then each one has to provide 2 amenities that could include any of those listed. Picnic benches. The minimum 16 feet of height and 30 inches in width is actually something that's from our multifamily housing code around common areas. So essentially the same standard as we have in other locations in the code. We talked about fire pits and then some kind of canopy or pergola or a shade producing facility, something for when it gets real hot and people want some refuge from the sun. And then landscaping is just a reference to be sure that we catch. Landscaping, I think, is going to be a very important component to the design success of these units or of these parks. And you'll see that in the landscaping section, it refers to our landscaping code. And usually that's, for context, that's usually 10% of the site has to be landscaped with like either cover or mulch items or trees or shrubs of different heights. How do you feel about this? Go ahead, Patrick. Or who was that? Ed?
Yeah. I don't see the reasoning for the picnic bench, the fire pit, or the canopy. As far as the fire pit goes, I would want to encourage people to have a fire pit. You know, much of the year we have bad air. I just don't see the reason. And I've done some traveling with my son in his RV, which has a canopy attached to it. And I think a lot of the RVs have canopies, especially the bigger ones.
Mm-hmm.
And there are people who are now carrying those sort of clean burning stainless steel fire pits with them, if they're into that sort of thing. And like my son always, he had chairs and a table that he could put outside. So I just don't see the reasoning for requiring that.
Any thoughts on that?
The only thing I find necessary would be the picnic table. We like, you know, people like to eat outside, and carrying chairs and or a table to fit maybe 6 or 8 people, which a picnic table can typically do at the most, takes up a lot of room. Yes, there's no really need for canopy because most of us have got canopies. And a fire pit is only there basically to give you that quote unquote outdoor camping experience. So that's kind of a hit or miss.
The one that I went to was over in Sisters, and so obviously it was a little bit east. So it was actually nice to have the fire pit because one, we cooked on it, which was really enjoyable, and it was really small. I mean, I think we're only fitting about maybe 4 pieces of wood in it. Like, it wasn't huge, but you know, we cooked on it, and then we also, you know, kept warm by it, to be completely honest, because when we went, it was definitely colder, and so I believe we went in like October, so it was nice to have, to be completely honest. So my thoughts. I think if I was putting in an RV park, having the option to be able to have, you know, to put them in there would be, I feel like most of them have them, I would assume.
I think there are kind of two places that these amenities came from in my justification. The first is related to the common areas and their amenities that we require in multifamily development, that to activate some of the spaces in common areas, and this is different than little private common areas like these. I guess these would be considered private open space. That there is some kind of seating provided in some kind of designated area where a person could make a fire if they chose to. I don't know how common that is among folks that use recreational vehicles, but I could see there being maybe some challenge in not having a designated area and having folks making fires on the ground. You know, I guess they're part of being in an RV does provide you some living space that's not outside, but some of the units really are just designed for sleeping, and most of the living space is an outdoor experience. So maybe it's not that that they're required to provide these amenities, but maybe there's some kind of hook that encourages them, or encourages a design of what we could call private open space at each spot. I guess getting down to it, what's the bare minimum that each spot has to have? Separation between the units, and it's just a parking space?
It depends how long you're going to stay there. I mean, if you're there to enjoy the outlying community for 3 or 4 days, you're going to want, I'm going to want a picnic bench and a fire pit.
Mm-hmm.
I don't need the canopy. I mean, we use our trailer, basically, that's where we sleep. That's what it's for, to get from here to there, so I don't have to pay for a motel room that costs me $200 a night. I can stay there, and if it's a nice area, and if it's raining, well, okay, then I'm in the trailer. But if it's nice, we're outside as much as possible.
Mm-hmm.
So that's just personal observation.
Other thoughts?
I kind of agree with you, Maddie. I would rather there be the amenity there, somebody trying to start a fire on the ground, which could cause a huge fire, even a worse fire, because it spreads so fast. At least in a fire ring, it's contained.
So we could say something like we could just discuss providing amenities and not necessarily requiring a minimum. So striking the words minimum of 2. So each site must be provided with amenities, not specific to the things listed below. And that just gives a person that's designing an RV park an idea of what we think of as amenities.
Right.
And they can decide if they want to include those or if they'd rather forego them based on their design.
I'm going to go the other direction, and I like the idea of requiring 2. Coming from the approach of the more requirements we create in this document, the higher caliber development we're going to encourage. I mean, I'm not saying that we don't necessarily want an RV park in our community, but if they're going to build one, it's got to be nice. And I think the residents might appreciate that.
Yeah, I also think that having a picnic table, having a fire pit, but having the fire pit there doesn't necessarily mean that every single person has to use it, but it does give people the option to use it. And I honestly think that's important. Like I said, for cooking purposes, I don't know. It's something that I use often. So, just my opinion.
I think generally when I think of an RV park, I think of it a lot like a campground. And I suppose the U.S. Forest Service has ingrained in me that every camp spot has a picnic table and a fire ring. And I don't think I thought too much more about it than that. But I could see why there might be opportunity. We may want to say that like maybe spaces of a certain size have to have these amenities, and that there's an allowance for spaces of smaller sizes can not provide those things if there's a desire to see a variety of different types, if the objective is to see a variety of different types of spaces in a facility. We could also leave a question mark in that spot and kind of get through some of the other criteria and come back to it.
Let's keep moving and come back to it.
Okay. Yep. Great. Okay, so speaking of common areas, let's talk about those. A conveniently located service building, so that no one has to walk more than 300 feet to get to the service building, which typically has showers, toilets, laundry facilities. And these help a couple things. One is providing a sustainable longer stay option for RV parks, laundry facilities, and showers. I know a lot of RVs, the fancier ones, have these amenities in them, but we know that there are plenty of folks, myself included. I have a truck with a topper that I go camp out in a lot, and having a shower facility or somewhere where I can do some laundry is super helpful. It also assures that I am more presentable to the community that I'm visiting, and it also is awfully nice to not encourage or have less reliance on chemical toilets inside of RVs, which then necessitates a dump space or a dump facility. And that can be just a little bit more than most people are looking for in their camping experience. Any concerns about what we're talking about with the service building? So service buildings sometimes are like a shop or a market. They'll have like a toilet, bathhouse, shower facility, and then adjacent to it, they'll sell basic necessities, small convenience store type items, toiletries and whatnot. So that's something to consider as well.
I like the idea of service buildings. Are we suggesting that it's a requirement that they have on-site laundry facilities? Is that a common requirement then? I mean, there's a laundromat in town.
Sure. I do know that, yeah, good point. Good point. You don't want to create intense competition between the community and laundry facilities, but that is something that's state and included in their common building or their service building. Whether that is something you want to encourage is another story. So we can
I think it lends itself to the desire to have a higher quality RV site. It's something very desirable when people look through go online and look up an RV site. If that's there, that's going to be on the top of their list.
I know, like not the same, but when I look at Airbnb options, if I'm going to stay longer than a week, I often try to find a place that has laundry facilities. I imagine that's similar to folks that are on the road traveling.
Maddie, when I'm reading this one, my question is, are each of these buildings supposed to be within 300 feet of all RVs? Is that what? So each building has to be. You can't have them like spread out throughout like that they would be clustered in one spot and they would all be really close to everything, or you'd have to have multiple ones throughout.
I think it depends, Chair, on how big the RV park is. I think the idea is trying to make them as convenient as possible so that no spot is more than 300 feet away from one. So if you had a long linear RV facility, park facility, you might find, if the park itself is 3,000 square feet long, 3,000 feet long, or maybe that's a little bit too big of a facility, but that's 1,000 yards. Something that's in a more typical depth, like a typical depth of a large 2-acre lot is somewhere around 200 or 300 feet, so that you couldn't put the common building like right at the corner or the edge and have people having to walk clear across the facility in order to access it, especially since it's meant to accommodate toilets and showers. So the idea is that this standard 300 feet encourages the common building to be centrally located so that it reaches all of the spaces. It doesn't necessarily mean that you'd have to have multiple buildings.
Okay, I wasn't sure exactly if you decided to have like your bathroom in one spot and then your, laundry facility, if they each separately had to be within 300 feet of each one served, if that makes sense. That was kind of more my question. If you did have a larger lot, if they would get away with, this grouping of RVs is 300 feet from this service, this group, that was kind of what I wasn't sure about, which I don't know the likeliness of that, but that was it.
How about adding, if because that's not very clear, you're correct, Chair, conveniently located or centrally located service buildings, to kind of give it some more direction.
Right.
And that services may be separated to serve, provide bathrooms in one and laundry facilities and something else in another, if that's the way they wish to design it. But I think another thing is that that is to make sure that perhaps some of the spaces are not favored over others as being
Right.
closer or farther away from services. I personally don't like camping next to the bathrooms myself, but
No matter where you put them, Maddie, they're going to be preferred or unpreferred. It's just
right,
the way it
right. I guess there's no way around it. It's true, David. I prefer to be at the far corner away from the bathrooms, so then you don't hear people slamming the door all night.
Right, right.
Okay, so how about changing that to centrally located service building? And that way it'll give a little bit more direction. Do we want to strike the 300 feet?
Yeah,
I think we should.
Okay. And then service buildings, plural, will be equipped with flush toilets. So, and I'll put a little sentence in there that says services may be separated. It doesn't have to be all one building with all of those things in it. It can be one thing and then another thing as needed.
Though economically and construction-wise, it's wiser to do it all in one building.
Sure. And to that end, David, sometimes it's also more economical to put those services like right at the setback.
Right.
Because then you're not putting as much pipe in the ground to serve them.
That's true. That's true.
So the question to you all is, if you live next door or down the street from an RV park, it's the first thing you see when you roll through the RV park is the bathrooms. Is that a good thing or a bad thing? Anyhow, I think that we'll use the word centrally located, and we'll hope that kind of brings together the idea that we'd like to see those facilities accessible to a lot of people who are served by these RV parks. Common open space is important. So at least 10% of the area of a park should be used for some kind of recreational use, like a playground or an open area with planted vegetation of some kind. Kind of like a little neighborhood park. And you can't use any of the storage areas or the roadway. Can't count for open space. And also, you can't use the caretaker's facility or a swimming. The code that I was reading from indicated that they also did not include swimming pools or sport courts as constituting open space. How do you feel about that? Can someone dedicate all of their open space as a pool?
No, I don't like that. I mean, I like the idea of a pool, but I think open space should be something different.
Okay. Thinking places that you could pull into an RV park with like some other family members who bring their own RV, and you might want to let kids play out on a grassy field or on a play structure or something that's kind of an internally located open space, very similar to how we require for like hotels and motels. Any more thoughts on that before I move into landscaping? It's kind of along the same lines.
I like it the way it's written.
Okay.
Yeah.
Landscaping is consistent with our landscaping section for commercial properties, to screen RVs from adjacent properties, providing attractive entrances, managing dust and erosion, and screening between rental spaces. So basically, the requirement is 10%. Section 3.2300 speaks to a variety of things, including what kinds of plants you can plant, how big the plants should be when they're put in the ground. There's some really specific requirements about 5-gallon bucket size plants for shrubs and trees. Creating a landscape that's going to survive, essentially, is what the requirements are aiming towards, rather than something that just gets planted at the construction and then dies, and then it's just a, pavement and scrubland forever. The good news is that we get enough water in our weather cycles that it's impossible to keep it from growing in many cases. So usually that's not too much of an issue. Getting into the area, these are some verbatim sections from state and fire protection. There are actually some RV park fire code standards, and I can cite that instead of being really detailed in this section. Danny Soulsby, our fire marshal, provided that reference to me a couple weeks ago, and I have just forgotten it until this moment. So let me make sure I cite that. And then putting up all kinds of crazy structural additions to RVs that sit on site for a long time, like people build awnings and decks and permanent facilities onto RVs often, and I think it's safe to say that we'd rather not see that. So again, here we are back to the fire topic. Fires may only be made in stoves or a fire ring. Whether or not a hazard, tents can be permitted, but in some cities they limit the number of tents per site to 2. Is that an okay thing for us to do?
I'd like to talk about the tent thing.
Okay.
If that's something that doesn't exist here in Creswell, is a place to tent camp, I don't think. And, people are coming through on bicycles. We don't have any place. And if you're going to rent an RV site, which might cost $45-50 a night for a tent, that's kind of like what bicycle campers are trying to avoid.
Mm-hmm.
I think it would be better I think we should have a place for tent camping. And if we're going to have an RV park, we should make sure there is a place for tent camping. But I just think it should be an open area somewhere where people can tent camp and, have a minimum number of parking spaces, maybe 2 parking spaces for people that are driving and chanting.
Mm-hmm.
That's just my opinion on that. Rather than connecting it with the RV spaces.
Okay. I think that you have a good point, Ed. I think it is true. There is a lack of tent camping option within the city, and these RV facilities may be where people find opportunity to tent camp. We have a bike rest stop that would certainly encourage people to find bike services, but we don't necessarily have a spot for them to camp.
Well, don't you cover that in the second line, areas for group camping may be established with the following provisions?
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, I almost, again, a major portion of the RV parks that I've been to, again, they do have a tent camping option for people, a separate open area. And yeah, it only costs them like $5 a night for tent camping or things like that. So there is a option for like you say, Ed, the bicyclers to come in and use that RV park.
I think what they're talking about on this is you can only have a minimum of, or you can only have a maximum of 2 tents in that parking space. So let's say you have a family of 8 that are coming camping, but their trailer doesn't have have enough places for 8 people. So the kids sleep in a tent.
Right. Yeah, they usually do.
This allows them to put it so the kids can sleep outside or whatever. It's
Right.
not necessarily where somebody who is riding a bike through town rents an RV space to tent camp. That's not what I don't believe that's what that portion of that regulations is for. I think it's just saying you don't want any more than 2 tents instead of all of a sudden now you've got an RV plus 5 tents for no reason. So I think that, like what you said, David, a lot of places have those spaces for group camping or where you put up a tent and it's a lower rate than an RV space. But we're not going to want to have an RV plus 5 tents out in one space.
Commissioner Gehring, you make a great point, and I would propose to add some kind of reorient that tent section. So yes, there is a number limit to tents erected on a rental space that has an RV on it, and then there might also be a separate provision or set of requirements for spaces reserved for non-RV users or campers that arrive who have the primary intention of camping in a tent. So whether they're motorized or not motorized, there are tent-only sites, for example, rather than an RV site that has tents as an accessory. I call them an accessory use. And I think the accessory use should have a limit to the number of tents, because then there might be sort of impinging upon the neighbors with tents. If you take up the whole space with your RV and then you set up several tents, you're kind of like blending or encroaching in another space. However, if you were to show up with a small vehicle and a tent, like to show up in a normal sedan car or something, or even if you show up with your bike pack and you're brave enough to carry everything that you need for the night on the back of your 2 wheels, then you ought to have a site that's perhaps a different orientation than what is designed for a pull-through trailer. And I think that that's more than likely in these facilities, and I think it should have separate set of criteria.
Now in Europe, the tent camping spaces are always an open space with vehicle parking on the outside. It's not a site like we do in our state parks here. It's an open area. It's really what it's like is the bicycle hiker camping spots in our state parks, hiker biker areas. But in Europe, they have at the edge of what we would call a hiker biker area, a few parking spaces for cars for the people who are going to camp in their tent, and then you carry your tent from your car out into the area and put it up. And that's what I think it would be better for the RV park. It looks better when it's easier to maintain, and it looks better.
So in turn, Commissioner Gunderson, you're familiar with these facilities. Do you think, not to prescribe necessarily what the RV park must provide, but rather provide an open, just so I understand your intent, we're trying to think of ways to encourage tent camping that kind of is symbiotic with RV uses, but is not necessarily designed the same if an RV park elects to have that area identified.
Yeah, although my preference is that there would be an area required for tent camping. That's just my opinion.
Okay.
I agree with you, Ed.
Because it's gotten so that a lot of RV parks won't allow tent camping anymore around the country. And it can be difficult to find a tent camping spot.
Okay. Any feeling on the percentage? Like usually the most successful ones I've seen have a percentage of the total area to be dedicated for non-motorized camping. 5%.
Yeah, I don't know what the number should be.
Okay.
Yeah, I have no idea.
Well, I'll do a little research on that, but the idea is that there should be rules for tents in the sites that have RVs, and then there ought to be a separate place for tents, just
Yeah,
tent camping.
That's what I like.
And speaking of rules for tents, do we want to put a provision in there for how long a tent camper can stay? I know we're talking 90 days for RVs. Do we want somebody to pitch a tent for 90 days?
I don't know. We could leave it the same. Why not?
I mean, if they have a shower, a toilet, and a laundry facility at their disposal, and they want to pay per night to tent camp, I would probably leave that to the operator to determine if they want to have a different or shorter duration for tent camping. Hi, Lila. Any feelings on duration for tent camping or feelings that way?
No, tent camping, they should have space for tent camping.
Okay.
Should be required. And I don't think the time frame should be any different than the trailer.
Okay. Okay. I will revise that section for y'all. Let's see. I guess the one thing for tents is I do think that the 300 feet from the service area or the service building is important. It's common that if there is tent camping, it's like set all the way away from all the amenities because it's usually a lower cost to tent camp. And so they kind of stuff people in the far corner or something like that. And I think it would be appropriate to require that those services are close enough for people to access. Getting into storage sheds, we've had mixed results of allowing storage sheds in mobile home parks. I know those are different than RV parks, but you start getting into providing storage space at RV parks, and suddenly it's more like a mobile home park and not like an RV park anymore. And the idea of this is that people travel and they travel with all the things they need and not anything more, and they don't leave anything behind. So storage sheds, for example, so some RV parks in my research do provide storage areas for unoccupied or unattended vehicles. Like if someone, for example, wanted to visit Creswell and then was going to leave on an airplane to go somewhere for a couple weeks and then come back, or seasonally visits Creswell and comes back and uses Creswell as their home base to travel around, say, the Northwest. RV parks can generate a lot of revenue from that. So many places allow storage of RVs and boats and trailers on site, but they limit the amount of area that a park can dedicate to that kind of use, because then we end up with storage facilities and not a park. Thoughts on that?
You know what you wrote looks good.
Okay, great.
I agree.
Yep.
Excellent. Okay, and then we've talked about at the last meeting, utilities should be placed underground. All the plumbing and sewer services have to meet code. No fancy business there. Electricity, rental spaces may be provided with electrical outlets. Some cities require it. I don't know if I have a feeling one way or the other. I know when I travel, like I told you, I have a truck camper, so it's not quite the same. But I just assume not use on-site electricity unless it's absolutely necessary, or unless you're hooking up like a big facility to water and sewer hookups. There might be some spots that have sewer and water hookups, in which case electricity might be a good coupling with that. But then there are folks that are visiting that may just want to pull through and use their solar panels or their battery pack that they've got on board. I don't know, what are your thoughts on requiring electrical service to the sites?
You leave that up to the developer.
Right, the developer should be wise enough to give that option to his tenant per se that, yeah, here's your space with a 50 amp outlet for your big, humongous travel coaches, and then here's one with a 30 amp outlet for us with the RPod, and then here's one without any electricity for Maddie. And the cost of those spaces will vary, and they usually do.
I agree with that. Yeah, that should be up to the developer, because you may want to offer a site without electricity at a lower rate.
Okay, good. I hear concurrence on that. Excellent. Let's see, garbage disposal. There's a lot of discussion about garbage disposal in the state and ordinance. I think sometimes this is a big topic for places that have visitors who don't stay a very long time, but just the language that they used seemed pretty comprehensive. Durable, washable, non-absorbent metal or plastic containers with lids. They've got to have one for each space, and they make sure that they're collected and they don't attract nuisance rodents or anything like that. Got to be registered with the DMV in order to pull into a space, and you have to be capable of driving on the public roadway. As you mentioned before, an RV may remain in one park for 90 consecutive days. And then you had a conversation about whether there were options to provide longer stay opportunities. And I think we talked about traveling professionals like nurses and construction folks, and that they could, an RV park, remember these RV parks are always going to come to the Planning Commission per the way this is written today as a conditional use. So they could ask for up to 25% of the total rental spaces to say, we want these to be utilized by longer stay tenants. And that can be part of a condition of their approval.
I think that percentage should be smaller.
Okay. 15? 10?
Maybe I was thinking 10.
10?
Because we don't want to turn it into a permanent. Yeah.
Okay. Any
Maddie,
thoughts?
I thought we had discussed about doing a age minimum on trailers or RVs. Wasn't there something brought up like 10 years?
Yeah.
No RV.
Well, I think we covered that by saying that they've got to be registered and,
legally capable of driving on public roadway.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And if something was really clunky, that could be left up to the developer.
I think, Patrick, that happens at RV parks a lot, that the operators will make discretionary calls when folks show up wanting to stay. I don't know if, I just don't know if the city has the ability, thinking through that, I don't know if the city has the ability to regulate that. What we do have is the ability to, if there's a concern about RVs that are staying too long, we can request that the sheriff visit an RV park or monitor an RV park for vehicles that are unregistered or are not capable of driving legally on the road. But from a perspective of, it's sort of like saying we don't accept building materials that are these certain kinds to be put on your house because they won't last long enough. I
thought there was a discussion.
Yeah, there certainly was, because I think we were all really surprised that RV parks have this sort of nuance to their business. Mostly because, or in my opinion, it's what if you had a really nice vintage Airstream or something? It'd be a shame to not be able to go visit an RV park because it happens to be an older unit. I think maybe they use that as a screening tool. to say 10 years old and younger. But
in the new vintage, the old vintage trailers are coming back around and they're becoming popular. They're even making them to look like the old vintage trailers. Like, well, that looks like it's 30 years old. Well, it's not. Well, prove it.
And you know, I guess the only thing I hope is that they're not as heavy as they once were.
Oh, they're not. No.
Is that okay, Commissioner Gearing? Does that satisfy some of your concern? Or
No, that's fine. I thought there was a discussion about it, and I couldn't remember what we had decided exactly. So, no, it's fine.
Okay, going back to the duration of stay, the number of spaces for long duration stay. Do you have a feeling 10%, 15% of the spaces? So if it's a 20 unit or a 20 lot RV park, you could have 2 or 3 spaces.
I was thinking between 10 and 15 myself.
Okay.
I thought too high.
I'd go for 15.
15. Okay. Thank you. And 1 off-street parking space for each RV space. When there are additional, you can provide additional parking spaces, but they can't be used as common area. So parking space, so like John and I had this conversation because I think he's done a fair amount of RV visiting as well. And he said often that he'd pull into an RV park and like friends that live in the area would come visit. And they'd, go to the common area and hang out, or they'd cook at their RV in the picnic area, the open space area at each spot. But generally that it's advisable to provide additional parking spaces on site. I see a lot of head nods for that. Good. I'll have to go back and reference, but I think, what do we think about, you'll have additional parking spaces per unit. So let's say there's a 20 lot RV park. And the idea is that there are extra parking spaces distributed around the park, not less than 1 per 10 spaces. So that means we'd have to have 2 bonus spaces that are not assigned to an RV rental space. Just to give some context to this. So we've got 20 pull-through or RV spaces. We've got a tent area set aside, and we've got 2 extra spaces for visitors. And they might be adjacent to like the service building or adjacent to the common area that has like a play structure. And then we've got tent spaces. And I understand tent campers, some of them might not need a parking space because they might arrive otherwise on foot or on a bike. But maybe there's a certain number of parking spaces for like the whole square footage of that tent area, like 5. That's assigned to tent campers. That's like a pooled parking area. So for every for every 500 square feet of tent camping area, you'd have 2 parking spaces or something like this. Any thoughts or feelings on that ratio?
I really, as far as the tent camping goes, I don't know. That sounds fine to me.
Okay.
The concern I have, I'm just envisioning somebody pulling in with like a huge Monaco where they have a vehicle pulling behind them. Mm-hmm. And the coach takes up the whole space. Then where are they going to put their extra vehicle? They're going to have to park like their commuter vehicle. They're going to park. And if we only have 2 options for 20 camper spots, I think that's going to fill up really quickly. I don't know if that's enough.
Usually a unit like that, when they reserve the spot, they will be asked how long is their trailer and what are they towing, and they are reserved a spot that will fit what they've got. Mm-hmm. If they've got 60 foot worth of trailer and or car or boat or whatever, they are allocated a space that's big enough to accommodate
60 foot.
what they have. Thus, not very often do Linda and I get a pull-through, because those are meant for your big Monaco trailers with an extra car behind them. They are, 60-foot, 40-foot units. We usually get a 25-foot unit that we can back into, but usually it's figured on. Okay, you've got a trailer, you've got whatever, and this is what you're towing it with, and you need this much space, so we're going to put you in unit number 7.
And would they, in your situation, then would the space be configured where you park your trailer on a hitch and then park next to it, or are you still parked kind of in front of it?
I'm parked in front of it. The space is deep enough that I pull into it and stay hooked up to the trailer, and I'm just fine. I unhook, and then I go where I want to go, and then I park right in front of my trailer.
Fair enough.
Mm-hmm. Okay. That seems pretty reasonable to me. I also think this is something that might be a market item, where guys or gals who decide to build and open an RV park, they probably have these like really specific components or like golden ratios of parking spaces and size of spaces and lengths of spaces to accommodate these different RV types. And I'm sure that a good business person is going to make an argument that they need X number of pull-through spaces, X number of trailer hookup, like smaller camper-style spaces, and then a certain amount of tent camping space. And I bet we'll get requests to exceed the minimums on parking requirements, is my hunch. But that's just my gut feeling at the moment.
That's great.
Just because each of as the industry evolves, I think we're seeing, different like a lot of differentiation in the market. It's not just like a one format RV that everyone has the same one. When I walk around Creswell and I look at the RVs that people tuck into the backyards and hop curbs and put them in their, in their lawn for the season and whatever, that's also not legal. So hop the curb with your RV. But we don't usually ruffle any feathers unless the neighbors complain. But generally speaking, I see all kinds of different RVs in town, and people will roll around in some pretty old, leaky looking things and some really new fancy light R-Pod type things that pop open like this and are quite, for what size they are, they're incredibly well equipped and look very luxurious. And then you've got people like me still camping in the back of their Tacoma truck.
The R-Pod only weighs 3,000 pounds.
Wow.
Yeah, fully loaded.
Wow.
So
I'm shooting for somewhere around 300.
Oh, you go to a little teardrop.
Yeah, exactly. Well, anyway, it looks like we made it to the end.
Question?
Yep.
I see no notes or anything about if they want to have a dump site.
RV dump site. We should probably put in some kind of in the refuse disposal section. Hey.
That if they're going to have one, they need to do so and so.
Okay. Good suggestion. Thank you. I will find out what the requirements are for that. You think it's something that, David, you might require a dump site for a facility over a certain size? Like over a certain number of rental units?
It's a convenience item that the RV park offers. It's not really size that determines it. It's an amenity that some RV people look for. So that, if they're if they've been there for a week and they've got to go, all day long before they get home or to another dump site, we'll look for a dump site. And for sure, you're going to look for one before you get home, before you park the unit. But it's something that adds to the amenities of the park and makes it more valuable and more desirable as a place to visit.
So I'm hearing you say that it's an allowed item, but it's not a required item.
No, it's not required.
Okay.
Because technically, you could, if you're hooked up to sewer where you're parked, you could dump.
Right. Got it.
So.
Okay. Any thoughts on that? Thanks for adding. Anything else I've missed?
I've seen RV parks where they have kind of like their own inner park sewer system.
Yeah, they do.
Run their own gray and black water directly to it. But then there's some that actually have a dump site, and there's some that don't have anything. You're lucky if you have water.
Yeah, well, that's called dry camping.
Yeah, dry camping.
That's where you put out your solar panels.
There you go. Thanks very much, you all for the comments. You want to come back to the amenities quickly in section D about what a space should have or must have? Any feelings now that we've had the whole conversation, the picture's a little bit more clear? Do you think that picnic benches?
I agree with what Seth said. I think if you put a minimum of it on amenities, it makes it more appeasing to people and makes them want them. Where if you just said it's just a place for you to park your trailer and sit there for a couple of days, but not, you're going to see hardly anybody there. I don't know very many places that I've ever RV'd, camped at that didn't have a picnic table and a fire ring at a minimum.
Okay.
I think they should be that, okay, you can have, here are the amenities you can have. You decide which ones you want. These are allowed. It's up to you to say what you want to put in there.
That's how I interpret it.
Not requiring them.
Right, so the terminology, including but not limited to, basically saying that each space has to have a couple things at it. It could be a table and a bench, and they could do the rest as landscaping. And some spaces could have fire rings. Some spaces could have something even more enhanced, like you could rent a gazebo site or a higher value kind of amenity.
Yes, but they don't have.
But they don't. They don't have to. Okay.
They're not required.
That's how I interpreted the way it was worded. Is that here's a list of things that you could do. Pick two.
So that still has a requirement, but it doesn't limit it to the two things that we've brought up: picnic tables and fire rings. So you could be creative about that and say, I think what people really want is some kind of our Adirondack chairs, or some other porch type furniture. I think that'd be fine. But the idea is you can't have a naked site. You can't just have a space where a vehicle pulls through in and out and have it just be a couple box shrubs on the side, and that's good enough. I think that's where we were concerned about the caliber of the design and the development of it, and wanting to see it be maybe just like a step above minimum.
I like what Seth said about the hot tub.
Hot tub. Yeah.
Hot
Why
tub.
not?
So there-
I mean, I think you guys are all onto something. Maybe we should get together and open an RV park.
Yeah.
Okay, well, I'll try to do some wordsmithing on that and see if we can't. I'll look at a couple other codes and see what they say about amenities and bring it back to you all.
The only other question that I had goes back to the screening between sites and it being 6 foot. All right. Do they, when they're landscaping the build out, are they putting a 6 foot shrub in there, or are they putting something in there that can grow to 6 feet? How does that work?
It's a good question. That's actually some of the requirements that we have around trash facilities in multifamily housing developments and in commercial developments. The options are you can either put up an opaque screening, like a chain link fence with the strips in it, or that's like an example, or you can put some vegetated, like a vegetation screen, like arborvitae or something. And I think the idea is that there's a minimum caliper size of the bush itself, which someone like your fearless planner has to go out and check, and demand that they install per the code. And I believe the idea is that there's some kind of reasonable amount of time that they grow to 6 feet to provide the screening. I don't think it's very reasonable to expect someone to install something that's immediately going to be 6 feet.
And do we have to go into that detail in this document, or is that covered somewhere else?
I think that's actually, they bring it up. It's included in that section 32300 that's cited. But opaque hedges, fences, or walls, I don't know if it makes a difference. It could be struck at this point, and it could just reference back to the landscaping standard if that felt better.
I'm okay with it the way it's written. I was just trying to get clarification to see if we were covering our bases.
Yeah, I mean, I think the point in this case, Seth, is to speak to our intent. And in fact, the idea of screening the RV park visibly and audibly from adjacent properties. In this case, the hedges and fences that I'm referencing here are not what you're describing. They are the hedges and fences in the setback between like a neighborhood and the RV park. Separated the spaces. I think that needs to be more or better explained. Thank you for highlighting that. I think that's where there needs to be something specific about at least separating the spaces by a landscaping strip of a minimum width, like a 3 foot wide landscaping strip that goes between. So you can decide if you want those arborvitae to grow low and just provide a physical kind of buffer between two RV sites spots, or if you want them to really create privacy, in which case you can put up lattice or something else that encourages more privacy between the spaces.
Got it.
Does that seem about right for what this group was looking for?
Yep.
Okay. Great. Anything more? Okay. The silence is golden. Thank you very much for your consideration of this, commissioners. I will be making those amendments to the standards, and you will see them. I'll shop them around with our staff. I just wanted to make sure that they were in a place where I understood your intent in most of these cases, and I'll bring back those standards to you. If I can get them done by January, I will. If not, you'll see them at the February Planning Commission meeting as as a recommendation. Do you want to hear what's going on? Our look ahead.
Yep.
2021. I'll be quick. 2021, as we set our intentions as a city for planning for the new year, I think the big ticket items for us are going to focus on a few specific things. The primary focus of 2021 will be looking at an urbanization study, which is the step that we take as a city when we'd like to expand our urban growth boundary. The city of Creswell has been working towards that, as you know, in your extensive work on updating our comprehensive plan for the last 3 or 4 years now. I'm excited about this project, and I actually spoke with the consultant that did our housing needs analysis and economic opportunity study, Echo Northwest, to see how their idea of that project matched up with mine, and it sounds like things are we're all swimming in the same direction, which is great. That's going to be a big lift. It's probably going to be a few, if not several, meetings with you as the Planning Commission. It may include also a couple of joint meetings with the City Council. We try to do that at least once every couple years to have the two bodies join together, especially in the context of long-range planning. It helps you all get to share your thoughts with the city councilors directly, and vice versa. A great reason to do that is when we have a project that's more comprehensive in nature. So that's the primary objective. You'll see it concurrently with that urbanization study, so the urban growth boundary amendment, you'll see a couple things. One is all that work that we did around commercial and industrial land economic opportunities analysis will be folded in with some local economic development work that I'll be working on with our city manager. And there'll also be some work that we have to do related to providing services and looking at a service analysis for areas outside of the growth boundary. Currently, all of our facilities planning for water and wastewater has been done assuming that we are simply going to fix the system or enhance the system within our current UGB. So whenever we look outside of that service area, we will need to make some supplement to our facilities planning that shows the likely cost and sort of challenge that might come with servicing certain areas of the community. We know because of how long and how well we know the area of Creswell that there are areas within that we look outside the growth boundary by usually a mile, and we know that a mile in any direction from Creswell there are some areas that are lower than what the elevations are in town. Most importantly, that they're lower than the wastewater collection facility, and that poses some costs and challenges to opening land for development of new residential uses. Similarly, we want to be sure that we're considering, staff did an update of the buildable land inventory, which chronicles the land available for development, based on some of the floodplain analysis that's imminently moving forward. So we did discount the buildable land that was inventoried before based on those new flood elevations, knowing that when the floodplain is put into effect, that those lands will no longer be eligible per the Oregon revised statute to be considered as buildable. They're certainly still developable lands, but they are much more costly and have a lot more logistical challenge to build on. So that'll be coming to you within the next, I'd say we'll probably get started putting out a request for proposals sometime in early spring, so around March, and then we'll be talking about that for some time after throughout the year of 2021. From a current planning perspective, we've got a couple things on the burner. We still have interest at Holbrook Lane for the development of high-density residential use. There's a gentleman who'd like to build 22 units on that site, and he is intending to proceed with that project likely at the February Planning Commission agenda. we will also hopefully see the motel Super 8 and their work proceed. That'll be through the building program. We've heard of a couple other projects. I don't know how likely they are to be successful, but there's one project, commercial project, maybe on Highway 99 South. We're kind of working out how to provide them with utilities. And there are at least, you've already heard, and we'll see the final platting of the Craig Estates, 3rd edition, which is Owens Way. That'll connect Crestwood to North 5th Street. And beyond that, I think we're getting to a point. Oh, and finally, there are 3 lots down on South 10th Street, Butte Road, that are likely to be developed. They're right now fixing up that old house. And I'm sure I've missed some other things, but generally speaking, we are, more, or maybe the most important, is that we've gotten some interest in the Sunday Drive lots, those 26 lots on Sunday Drive. There's a developer who's a big kind of more production focused housing developer that's hasn't really ventured very far south in Oregon, but they're a national company, and they are looking at those lots, and they think that they've got a house design that they can put on those lots that will satisfy the requirements. And their only challenge at this point is to move. I think it's there are 4 properties that are really skinny, and they are going to probably adjust the property lines so that they can accommodate the width of this sort of narrow house product that they've got. I think the house design, if I recall, is we're looking at a 24-foot wide building that's 2 stories, separated or detached from the other units, but it's kind of like a more urban style. I think the final footprint ends up being somewhere between 1,300 and 1,500 square feet with a 1-car garage. So it could be a really nice fit for that neighborhood, and it sure would be nice to see those lots get built on. So that's what I've got coming on the horizon. What was that, Patrick?
Hopefully we don't have a whole bunch of HOA complaints again.
I'd like to think that they aired their grievances pretty well, but I guess you never know. I'm sure that there'll be some kind of discussion, but I guess the good news for that developer is that the property line adjustments they're proposing do not constitute a public hearing opportunity. They're really small. In fact, in some cases, they're less than 5 feet of adjustment. And my hope is that we will notice them. We will notice the neighbors, of course. But given that you all considered that application in 2018, the modification went through, all of their comments were recorded on the record, and we responded to them. And I did not hear any concern about the sizes of the lots or anything related to things like lot coverage, which could have been raised during that process because the lot sizes are small vis-a-vis the type of development they'd like to do. But given that, I think we could see them move right to building permit fairly soon. And if all of those projects come together, 47 units at the motel, 22 units on Holbrook, and 26 units on Sunday, if those all come true in 2021, I'm going to be pretty busy.
Sounds like a great year.
Yeah, and it could be, I guess I know that there's a lot going on in the world and there's a lot of uncertainty out there, but I'd just like to say that I feel very fortunate to work at a city like Creswell where there is still so much interest in continuing to develop housing in particular, but also commercial development. So much so that despite the pandemic and its impact on our economy, we hired, I think, a great asset to our team in hiring John. And you'll have to forgive me, I encouraged him not to stick around for the whole discussion tonight. He'll get to stay for many a planning commission in the future, and he will present to you and fulfill that role as he gets gets a little bit more comfortable with his role. But he will focus. His job will be to focus primarily on shortening the process time for current planning. So particular to building, getting folks from land use review to building permit. And I guess when I look out on the horizon with my admitted optimism, I see there being a lot of work for him and me in 2021.
Awesome. That's really good to hear. So as far as things go, do we want to move on to just the when the next meeting is? I think you pretty much did your, okay, cool. So Thursday, January 21st of 2021 will be our next meeting. Does that sound pretty good to everybody? Same time,
Yeah.
same computer. Cool.
Are we talking
right.
about 6 p.m.?
What?
Is it 6 p.m.?
5.
5. Thank you.
Yes.
1/21/2021.
Ooh.
Watch out.
All right. Thank you, everybody, for coming. And if I don't see you before, I will see you in January.
Happy holidays, everyone. Have a wonderful
Right.
New Year.
Bye, guys.
Bye-bye.
Thank you all.